Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 21 of the Live Your Jam podcast. I'm Ellen McGinnis, your host. Today, we're talking about something that I think is very important to living from the inside out. There are decisions we can make to help quiet our minds and tune into our intuition and further develop our connection to our soul. And there's a choice we can make, and that choice is around alcohol. More specifically, what happens when you choose to live without it. And I'm not alone in asking that question. Nearly 1 in 2 Americans are now trying to drink less, a 44% increase since 2023. That's not a trend, it's a shift in consciousness. But here's what I want to explore today that goes beyond the numbers, because for me, living clean isn't about restriction or willpower, it's about access to myself. When I'm not drinking, I hear my intuition more clearly. I process my emotions more fully. I show up more present in my relationships, in my work, and in my life. My vibration is higher and I feel like me. My guest today is Didi Jordan, a sober coach and founder of Sober Chapters. After years of being sober curious and cycling in and out of modest drinking, she left the corporate world feeling disconnected from her true purpose and made a decision that changed everything. And what she found on the other side wasn't just sobriety, it was herself, her purpose, and ultimately the love of her life. This conversation is for anyone who's ever wondered what it might be like on the other side of that glass. Whether you're sober curious, alcohol free, or simply drawn to living your absolute fullest, this one's for you. Didi, welcome to Live Your Jam.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to chatting everything about
Yeah,
sobriety and all the things with you.
it's so cool that you've made this change and you are helping others. So Didi and I met in LA a couple years ago at an event, and we were luckily seated next to each other. We both went solo. She flew from Australia to LA. I flew from outside of Seattle and to LA, and we sat right next to each other and just got on right away. So I know a little bit about our background, and today we're going to learn more. So take us back to the beginning. You described going back and forth, Didi, for years in a cycle kind of around being sober. And what did that look like and what finally broke the cycle?
Yeah, gosh, look, I think it's probably important to circle right back and tell you kind of how it started for me through conditioning, I would say, essentially. Just to give you the context, I'm originally from England and I grew up in a kind of boozy, kind of farming family. And I was actually given my first taste of champagne at just 8 years old, which really set the precedence for years of kind of like party girl image, I suppose. After that, I went through my teens and my 20s and I drank quite a bit and had lots of fun. But looking back, I realized there was actually quite a lot of chaos. And I did okay. Like I sailed through like my exams, and luckily I always worked hard and kind of partied harder and that kind of thing. But it wasn't until I came to Australia at the age of 32 and I came out of a long-term relationship and I kind of hit a bit of a rock bottom, I would say, and just didn't expect to be single at 32 on the other side of the world and felt a lot of shame with that. And it was actually a turning point for me because it was when I had to really like reassess kind of life wasn't working as it was. And what I found was that every time I drank, because I was newly single, trying to make friends, trying to connect, and every time I drank, I just had the worst hangovers and I would just beat myself up and I would be full of anxiety and shame. And especially being at that age where I thought I had it all figured out, I thought I was going to get married and have children and all of that. So I ended up just avoiding hangovers. Like I didn't want them because I knew they were just going to make me feel terrible. So I started taking breaks from alcohol. And every time I took a break, I just felt so much more connected to myself. Just noticed like these beautiful things around me, felt more present. And I started seeing a lot of signs and synchronicities. And it was beautiful. But because of our society and my corporate career is recruitment, which is sales, a sales environment, there was a lot of pressure to drink. And again, especially being single. So I would just yo-yo in and out of taking breaks, feeling amazing, feeling connected, feeling like I was getting all this guidance, and then going back to having like a terrible hangover and I'd just be like floored basically, and all the anxiety would happen again. And so it went on like that for quite a while. And then it also kept me stuck in patterns with the opposite sex. And I ended up being single right through up until I met Pete when I was 40. But at 38, I had this realization and this knowing that I needed to really make a change. And I couldn't bear the thought of giving up alcohol forever because I didn't feel like I needed to. I didn't drink every day. I was really kind of like healthy in lots of ways and would work out in the week. And then there was just always a risk of these hangovers at the weekend. But I knew with all this guidance that I had to make that change in some way. So at 38, I had this like deep knowing to give up alcohol until I was 40 and call it my sober chapter. And essentially, it was like a negotiation I now know with my ego where I was like, forever's too scary. I'm just going to give it up and go all in on healing my insecurities, looking at these patterns, facing fears. And ultimately, the biggest goal of all for me was to attract in the love that I had always desired. And that's how it evolved, essentially.
You hit on some things that I think are really important. There's a physical aspect of a hangover, but there's often shame associated with it and anxiety. So I think that many people can relate to, you know, alcohol is very fun. I mean, I grew up in an area where it's a pretty high bar to call somebody an alcoholic. It's like drinking's a part of the culture and it's wonderful, but if you're trained early on, that's the way it goes. You don't really get to make the conscious decision around how you want to behave. It's just the norm. So we have to unwind some things. I find if you're raised in kind of a drinky environment. And again, it's not all bad. I don't mean that. You kind of have to take a look at it later on. At least I did. So and also too, just the acknowledgement that you're saying, like, things weren't working and, you needed to make a change. So I loved hearing your story. I think what I also wanna pull out of it and highlight is for me too, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about I don't know if you wanna call it sobriety. It feels too intense for me to say I'll never drink again. I mean, I find that when I say never, it starts to mess with my mind. It's just like with food, like, I try to do 80/20, and so with alcohol, like, I was just thinking, when's the last time I had a drink? And I had to, like, really think about it, and I had a beer in March with a pizza at a sporting event because it hit all of the notes of, like, this is a fun thing I'm going to do, and I don't know that I wanna give that up, but again, it took me a while to recall the last time I had a drink, and so that feels better to me than just being like, "No."
Well, that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
how it went for me. Like I to say I'm never going to drink again. If someone had said to me, in fact, I'm writing my book at the moment, and the opening line is pretty much that. If somebody had said to me, "You will never have another drink again. You're not allowed to have another drink again," there's absolutely no way that I would be in the position that I'm in now. Like I had to really take that like
yeah.
staged approach with it for sure.
Right. And we're lucky because addicts don't really have that choice. But yet, we're not necessarily talking about addiction today. But I think what we're going to be talking about is the freedom and the vistas that you can achieve in life without alcohol. And that part, I think that's where the sober curious has been clearly it's out there. But that's the curious part. Like, what can happen to my life if I don't do this? I tended to habit my way we'll talk about it more, into not drinking. Like, I just have good habits and they work for me, and it's more of a clean way, and then I recognize, like, my meditations go clear. I'm older now, so the drinking, I can't sleep well, even 1 glass. So I make changes accordingly. But let's get back to you because Sober Chapters came to be, and you explained what the name really meant to you. It was like this 2 years from 38 to 40 where I'm gonna kinda have this next chapter be without it. But did alcohol-free living and starting sober chapters, because you left corporate and started this work, did it show you something about your purpose that you couldn't see before?
Oh, completely. Like, absolutely. So, gosh, there's so much to say on this, right? So, I was working with a coach. And I got really into personal growth. Like, around those times that I wasn't so happy and I was taking breaks from alcohol, I knew there was more. I just knew there was more to life, that I was meant to be doing more, but I just had no idea what that looked like. And I got really curious and it started with a Tony Robbins event that I went to in 2018. And what that event did was like, it opened my eyes up to what could be possible. And I learned that, we could rewire our brain. So that was really interesting to me because I'd had a lot of anxiety. And then I also learned about spirituality. And at that point, I wasn't particularly open on like a spiritual side. I was a little bit like, I was open, but I didn't really know anything. And so it kind of opened my eyes. And then I got really, really curious and I started listening to loads of podcasts and like Gabby Bernstein, The Universe Has Your Back, and all these things. And then I believe that, you're shown more and more the more open you are, and like more opportunities come across your path. And I found this relationship code and I ended up doing that deep inner work, and also assigning the coach who runs it, Marie, to be my coach. She really opened my eyes up to what was within me. And there was this kind of angel in me, I suppose, like the divine in me that was here to serve and here to focus on contribution and growth and all of these things. And I think that really woke me up to believe that. And I realized that sobriety fueled that divine part of me. Like it really helped me to lean into that and to think about who I wanted to help. And really, it wasn't something I'd been shown like in life. I don't know how to say it really about my family, but like kind of people that were of service were almost seen as do-gooders. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was just suddenly I realized there was another path and I lent into that more and more. And then the thing was that the alcohol, like when I drank that, it would fuel more my ego essentially. And yeah, pull me away from that true path. And I really started to see that the more work I did, I could differentiate between my divine and I guess my truth and the ego. So then it all just unfolded naturally. When I removed alcohol for that chapter, like the compound effect was huge because I wasn't fueling my ego with the alcohol and I was staying more true to that divine part of me. And just one thing after another happened. And within that sober chapter was when I became a coach. And the really interesting thing was that I gave up the alcohol on the 4th of July, 2022. And I did not plan that date. That just happened. And I remember like I was talking about like how many days I've been sober, and people are like, oh, 4th of July, that's a really interesting day to give up. And then I learned obviously more and more about what a huge day that is in the States. And I would call it like Freedom Day essentially, because it felt very free to know that alcohol was not going to be in my life it was going to be 22 months until I was 40. But that then started this like insane connection to America. And I ended up with an American business coach, and I ended up joining like a coaching certification in America. And I started having all these peers in the sober world in America, and it opened up this huge connection to America. And then I just started getting more and more guidance to be there, particularly Los Angeles. And my first clients were in America. And it was just all these things were unraveling. And I just kept following this kind of knowing that I was meant to be there. And I know that I wouldn't have been able to tune in and follow that guidance or trust that guidance and make the steps that I took had it not for being completely clear of the alcohol and fully trusting that divine part of me and my intuition. And then
Yep,
that's
yep.
why I ended up in LA sitting next to you at Lewis House and meeting Pete.
I wanna highlight some things you said in there just for our listeners, because I talk about this stuff all the time. When you talked about working with the coach and you were looking at what you were looking at is your subconscious beliefs, which we get from our family system. So in your family system, they're the kind of things you're like, "Why do I believe that? I don't even know." So what you're saying is you had a idea that people who do healing work or serve others in this kind of way, there's some thread or some belief system in your family that was shown to you that's like they're do-gooders, and that's not something we wanna do. Maybe this message is you can't make money at that. Maybe there's messages like they're not fun or they're teetotalers. I don't know what your family's message was. But those are I think some of the subconscious patterning is very difficult for people to understand because they're like, "Why do I believe that?" Jung would call that individuation, when you start to look at yourself separate from the system, right? And so I think that work that I just wanna highlight that because what happened was you were open, you chose to get support, and then you're like, "I'm attracted to this thing, but yet I have this tape in me that tells me that I'm not supposed to do this." You're like and so the more you kept following and then following that is like part of the flow, and also part of the what I would say intuition and action. You don't know why you're doing these things, they just feel right and aligned, and they're healthful too. They're healthful, they feel good, and then you opened up and met like a tribe of people in the United States. I mean, it's a really good story because it is a great depiction of what I try to share with people, because I would say you don't know where you're gonna end up. You really just have to keep following it and keep looking at yourself and making the decisions that kinda light you up. And I think from there, we ultimately help other people, but I really appreciated you sharing that about, like, kinda how that work and that opening led to, like, where you are now. Now you coach people at sober chapters. We're gonna talk a little bit more in the episode about the relationship code. You met the love of your life, you're getting married. I mean, all of these things where your life is going down this path that feels, I would imagine, pretty aligned and also really blessed and couldn't have, if you're 32 with whomever you're dating then, like, this is just a completely new path because you followed yourself and you're doing the work and have done the work, and then the work is just never done, sorry, that's the way I feel, like, I don't it doesn't always need to be hard, but there's always things we can learn about ourselves. Our souls, in my opinion, are here to develop, and as long as we can keep the ego working with us, versus against us, I really think the sky is the limit on how much we can develop. So, it's up to us. So, I
Totally, and
appreciate
I wanna add on that as well that I felt so stuck, and from the ages of 32, 33 to 37, say 4 years, I just felt like I was, like, backwards and forwards. I felt stuck, and it just felt like everything was just like, yeah, like Groundhog Day, like, just didn't have that purpose or fulfillment. And on the outside, I lived in Australia, had a good job and, like, nice home and good friends, but I felt like I was dying inside, like, literally, and
mm,
no one would have
mm,
really known how bad that was. And then I look back now at the last 4 years since I made those changes. I was 38 and then I'm 42 now, and just to see the way my life has just evolved is just
yeah,
mind-blowing. Just
yeah,
because, yeah, like you just said, the alignment, right? And just sticking to your truth, like your true path, and just following those breadcrumbs that I believe are shown
yeah.
to us from the divine.
They are exactly that. My friend calls them Terry, I always calls them soul whispers, but they are, it's just you just keep going, and it doesn't mean life won't be hard. We don't, this is like earth school, and we are souls that have a body, so we still are gonna have hard things. It doesn't make you impervious to any of that. How you handle them will change. How you view them will change. But this is great. No, I love this because it's such a rich conversation, Didi. I wanna keep going on the alcohol piece. So, as I said, I don't fully rule out alcohol. I just don't choose it most of the time. Like I said, I have what I call a habit of not drinking alcohol. And I just want to shout out for people in transitions. You heard Dee Dee say this, and in terms of what she wanted in her life. So she was going to cut it out. She knew it wasn't really working. When I knew that, my marriage was in trouble and we were working on my marriage. And in my mind, I was like, I kinda already knew this, and I have known this other periods in my life, but I'm like, alcohol and big decisions don't mix. So for anybody out there who's going through a transition, heads up on that one. I mean, it sounds obvious, but I think it's worth saying out loud. It's a depressant, and it's a decision impairment tool, and I think during a time when you need to be making clear-headed choices about finances, about relationships. I had children. I was very like, I'm gonna do everything in my power to make sure nobody, this is gonna be hard, but I don't wanna add any trauma to this situation. So I think by reducing or eliminating alcohol, it just helps you stay in the driver's seat of your own life. I'm not saying don't have a drink or it's bad to get, I have no judgment on that. And I love to see people having a good time. But let's talk about this. So how do you coach people who want freedom without a hard label? Is that a common approach, like, to what you're saying? Like, the hard label being like, so we're talking about that. I don't choose it most of the time. Like, how do you help people navigate that, Dee Dee?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I'm a great believer there's no coincidences in anything. So usually people will come across me through my own podcast or my Instagram or hear me talking and they'll resonate with something that I'm saying. And they see some of, their own story in mine, for example. And a lot of people resonate with this idea of a sober chapter because similar to me, like they don't really want to go as final as forever. They recognize it's not serving them and they want to take a substantial break. And the concept of sober chapters is, and like what I do with people is that they come to me, depending on where they're at, we decide on a potential time frame that they would like to commit to. And then it's a case of going through the coaching with me, but it's not usually to help people really get off alcohol so much. It's more about doing that inner work without alcohol clouding them so that they can make like huge progress in whatever area of life they want to look at. Or we usually go through like the whole holistic wheel of life of where they're at, like where they want to improve, where they want to sort of get unstuck. And the reason I do that, and my message is so it's about, yeah, removing alcohol so you can go deeper with that inner work. And that's because that was my own experience. Like when I was feeling stuck, I tried a Tony Robbins coach, I tried various different coaches. But if I was drinking alcohol on the weekend, on the Monday, Tuesday, when I was doing coaching, I couldn't access my subconscious. I couldn't get deep into my emotions, my feelings. I wasn't connected to my body. I didn't know what was
Yeah.
going on. So to take that out of the way and have this break, this gift that you give yourself, this container that you give yourself to start working with me and going deep into all of those different techniques, some mindset work, embodiment work, NLP, all different techniques, the results that you get, the compound effect that you get when alcohol's not in the picture, even just one or two drinks is huge. And yeah, there's only one person that I've ever coached that's gone back to drinking alcohol after
Mhm.
their chapter because they feel the difference and they haven't had that huge pressure, but they've chosen to stay alcohol free because they felt such a huge shift in their life.
So, what's the most common thing people discover about themselves when alcohol leaves the picture?
Who they truly are, literally who they
Mhm.
truly are, like
Mhm.
underneath all of the conditioning is who they truly are and what they truly want for their life. And often they reconnect with a younger version of themselves. What was it that you loved as a little girl? For example,
Right.
I loved performing, singing, poetry, dancing. And then I went away from all of that because I started drinking alcohol and that became a false comfort blanket for me.
Mhm.
And when that got ripped away, I ended up being terrified. I couldn't even do a podcast. But then through sobriety, I started facing those fears. And now I'm actually confident as I was as a little girl doing it as I loved it back then.
Yeah.
So it's like that reconnection back
Mhm.
to who you
Yeah.
were and who you always came here to be.
Mhm. I think that's really powerful and true too. I think the inner child has a lot of keys for us. So to be able to, and that's part of it too, accessing that part of ourselves, right, is super important because that's where the kind of unbridled joy resides within us, right? And the things that we truly love before the conditioning. It's true. So let me ask you another question here. So, what do you wish people knew before they started a sober chapter that would have made it easier?
I think the biggest one is that if you're curious and there's a feeling and a knowing that alcohol isn't serving you and that it's holding you back in any way, trust that. Trust that feeling. Like you mentioned earlier about sober chapters wouldn't necessarily work for addiction, but I do believe that everybody is on their own path and unique journey to sobriety. And I believe that you see a common theme where it is, I believe it's an awakening, and I believe that you're guided there for a reason. So to trust that because there's just so much growth and magic on the other side. And at the beginning, it can feel really scary. So I wish people knew what was on the other side for them because it will only lead to beautiful things. It really will. And there are definitely tough moments. Like it's not all rainbows and butterflies, particularly for people that have relied on it in ways they hadn't even realized. That social anxiety, like especially like I mentioned with my situation, like it was at every single family event. So you can feel really exposed without it. You have to learn to self regulate and feel your emotions, sometimes for the first time in years properly. So there's a process to go through that looks different for everybody, depending on past traumas and all of those kind of things. But just trusting the process, knowing that you're exactly where you're meant to be and you're on that journey for a reason, and that it will, yeah, like I say, only lead to beautiful things.
I liked all of that, but I really want to highlight and call out. I think that when what you said in the beginning was that like people know they're like, I really need to stop doing this. I really need, like, we know, and that sometimes it's our inner voice. Sometimes it's the experiences we have in the universe showing us that our actions aren't resonant with our best self, right? And it's alcohol too. It's messy, right? So some we can have unfortunate things happen. We can say the wrong thing. We can feel embarrassed. We can do stupid stuff, whatever we can other really not good things can happen, but I think for anybody out there who's like, I really know that this isn't serving me, that's your higher self saying, "Stop." Then love yourself and don't do it. I'm not saying you don't love yourself if you don't do it, but I'm saying listen to that, and that's like listening to your intuition and listening to what's best for you. If it were easy, these things were easy, we'd all do them, but they're not. They take effort, but I think the rewards um, far outweigh the effort, and then the sense of, like, sovereignty, and then also the sense of pride that you have to follow through on something you committed to yourself, and I think that's can be hard because people can feel shame. I want to say one other thing too. So what I also wanted to say was about we were talking about the I was talking about the shame piece of it's important to listen to ourselves and acknowledge that's our intuition for our best self, but there can be a shame piece associated with trying anything and not following through, and I think that's a very difficult thing for people to manage. So have you coached people who have started a sober chapter and then had to restart, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's all good data, right? Like, it's great data, like I say to people, it's awesome. It's like, what drove you to make the decision to drink again? Biggest thing of all is to give yourself compassion. Do not go and beat yourself up. It's happened, and you can kind of assess what led you to make that decision and then go from there. It's I definitely don't see it as any kind of a lot of people do, they restart their days and all of that, but it's more like I say, it's that journey to sobriety, and there's
Yeah.
usually loads that comes from that. So I run a program called Sober Chapters 100, and it's the group program that I run, and it's actually more of like an online course now, but I did it live last year, and I had beautiful women from all over the world. And one of them, bless her, just she stopped coming to the calls, and I was really trying to get a hold of her, couldn't get a hold of her, and what have you. And the feeling is that she had started drinking again and was feeling perhaps some shame around that. Tried to reach out, and then not so long ago, she came into my thoughts, and I just reached out and I sent her a message on the group chat that we'd had, and she wrote back and she said, "Oh my goodness, Didi, you can't write this stuff. I have literally just downloaded this app and gone in there because I've just completed 100 days." So she had
Wow.
a year
Yeah,
later gone back and done it. And that's it. That's the journey, right? Yeah.
exactly, and
Exactly.
we'll all do it when we're ready.
Yeah. One of the things my coach said to me at the time when I was going through that same sort of process is you have a choice. And whether it's in this lifetime or the next, you have a choice. And that landed for me big time because I was like, do you know what? I know deep down in my soul that my path is to be alcohol free and to be helping others and to go on a beautiful path of contribution with eventually the love of my life. And I knew that. And that's what really got me was like, this is my choice in this lifetime.
Wonderful. So, Didi, if someone is sober curious, not ready to commit, but feeling a pull, what do you tell them?
Just take that first step. Just try it. Listen to that nudge and just try, set yourself a goal and just see how it unfolds, essentially. Yeah. And like I say, if they've come to me, there's usually a reason for that. They've seen something in my own story, and yeah, so that normally take the leap from there.
Yeah, I love that. It's like just taking that first step and seeing what happens. And even as the woman you talked about who had 100 days sober later on, like that was their time. And so it's really important for people if they want something more for themselves to try different things and they'll find the right things that fit. And I think sobriety helps in that. It really helps with clarity and you feel really good. So let's talk about something that you and Pete, your fiancé, are starting together. You have another so you're following another crumb, if you will. You're still doing sober chapters, you're still working with people and helping them that way, but in terms of your calling to service, you're starting something called the Relationship Code. It's a new venture to help couples. So tell our listeners about that.
So yeah, the context. So it's a new venture for Pete and I, and we'll be taking it to Canada. But the the code itself has been around for I think nearly 30 years now.
Oh, it has.
So
Okay.
yeah, so the founders, Brett and Marie Jones, they established it many years ago. And I was fortunate enough to have found it at the age of 37, I believe. And it was just a life-changing experience. So what they do is they run 3-day events essentially, and they've grown now. They're all over Australia. They're over in the US, and then Pete and I are taking it to Vancouver, to Canada. And it's just had such a profound impact on my own life. And then I've also, through being a part of it and being a facilitator for them, witnessed so many incredible transformations. And there's a lot of couples that go there to work on their marriages, but there's also singles. Like I started there as a single because what they do is a lot of individual work. So it's kind of really looking at all of that conditioning that we've talked about, primarily those relationships with our primary caregivers, and really getting clear on what it is that has shaped your ego essentially, and the patterns that have been keeping you stuck, and the unconscious patterns that have been running the show essentially. And people really get a clear idea of what those are in that event. And yeah, it's a community too. It's a global community, and it's changed my life. It's done incredible things for Pete, and this feels just such an aligned mission for us to take it over to Vancouver.
That's great. So I didn't realize that Marie, the coach that you had used when you were 38 and you did your Serve with Curious thing, you did all your inner work, was the founder and one of the leaders of the relationship code. I thought it was, so that's wonderful. So there must be some, I mean, some tenets in there, some approaches where they probably break down the story and they look at the unseen parts of ourselves and through exploration. And then through that, you could also how we project onto others, and so it's their own model of how to probably to decode yourself and then be in relationships, I would imagine, something along those lines.
It's a powerful event, right? Like it's 3 day of like intensive
Wonderful.
work. And there's that more sort of teaching element where you're getting to know like more about your patterns, getting to learn about your ego and all of that. But there's also like actual kind of like transformational work that happens within groups. So you get broken into groups, and there's like a mix of different therapies and somatic type techniques that are used. And you get worked on individually away from your partner, but the couples get brought back together as well as part of their transformation. And you see people go in that have been on the verge of divorce or perhaps even separated, and they leave connected.
Right.
And it's so beautiful to see. And sometimes it's really difficult to explain the magic that happens in that room. But one of the biggest things I think that is spoken about and taught is about how things have just come through the generations, and how back in sort of the World War, for example, that men shut down and they internalized their emotions. And the women had to really step up and look after everything whilst their men were gone, including working, including looking after the families, looking after their partners, husbands, families. And then that created this dynamic that has then been fed down through the generations since. And that polarity between the masculine and the feminine has essentially completely shifted. And it's teaching people how to communicate again, and how to show the men how to be more in that masculine state and more in that sort of leadership role within the family. So it just breaks down so many different aspects that are just, yeah, huge for people.
Yeah, I remember going to, I mean, and then I talk about that a little bit, like the Industrial Revolution around, like our roles were kind of cemented then, and then more clearly accentuated that. That was just a crisis version of men had their role in providing and being off on women handle everything else, and that the women were the emotional centers, and how those the societal expectations, and neither gender kind of wins in that. But I attended a workshop with men and women. It was like a couples thing, and they were handing out cards in this model for men so they could describe their feelings. Because if you, I mean, I coach executives, so a lot of times you're like, "How was it?" And they're like, "Weird." It's like, "What? Well, I don't know what weird means." I just take, kind of Hoffman's emotional list, and I'm like, "Pick one of these." You know what I mean? So, and that's I'm teasing a little bit with men, but that's how they've been raised. They don't. I mean, generations of them weren't given the language, nor were they given the space. So I think that's going to be for really wonderful work and another extension of you serving others. And it'll be wonderful for you and Pete to do it together And for everybody who's listening, we're going to have information, particularly on the YouTube channel, where you can find Didi at Sober Chapters and more about the relationship code and where you can find that information. So I'm going to leave with a Live Your Jam question about the idea of Live Your Jam is listening to your soul, let your soul lead and your life follow. So I want to know, where's your soul leading you now, Didi?
That's a really great question. Where is my soul leading me now? I believe on this path that I've found with P and looking to impact as many lives as we can with everything that we've had the fortune to work through. And I'll say it out loud, and I think this is why there's hesitation. I have a deep knowing that I'm to be a mother, and I'm 42 years old, so I have to surrender to whether that's possible or not, or how easy that will be. But it's that deep knowing that I had years ago when I knew I needed to give up alcohol. It was that deep knowing to follow my soul to LA. It was my deep knowing to do the relationship code. And that same deep knowing is there with having a little baby girl. So we'll see. But I do believe that leaving a legacy through a child would be beautiful too, especially with all of the tools that P and I have had the blessing of having and teaching as well.
I would say to you, trust the knowing. Yeah, trust the knowing. It's beautiful. So thank you so much. And thank you for sharing. And it's just good to be reconnected with you again and hear your story and all the good work that you're doing. And you're a living example of not just the sobriety piece, but of being in a place in your life where this isn't working for me. So I'm going to make changes. And then I'm gonna follow from there from a whole or a more whole me, like from the work, right? What are the blocks and things? So it's really your story is a triumphant one, and I know it's gonna continue. So I am just thrilled that you've been on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen. It's been, yeah, gorgeous to reconnect with you and really great to see everything that you're doing as well on your own mission. So
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, everybody. Didi and Ellen signing off. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Live Your Jam podcast. If today's episode sparked insight or inspiration, follow that thread. That's your inner wisdom speaking. Share this episode with a friend who'd vibe with it, and if you're moved to, leave a review so others can find their way here too. Remember, the dreams that stir within you aren't frivolous. They're instructions from your soul. You can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcast or watch the video version on YouTube to see me and my amazing guests in action. Until next time, keep listening in and keep living your jam.